All right, so we talked about human biases, and sometimes people can be what apparently irrational about pricing, but justified by their human actions. And so the snacks was an area that people got kind of ticked off about with airlines. And then the baggage, and so companies started competing on these other areas. One of the reasons for that is that take away a 75-cent bag of peanuts from the consumer, they're ticked off, right? But if you give them a 75-cent bag of peanuts, they're like, well, peanuts are all right. You know, they don't really care, right? As soon as you start taking something away that was theirs, there's a bias there that we kind of talked about before with that ownership bias. You felt like it came bundled with your airline ticket. You get peanuts, you get drinks, you got to pay a little bit more for alcohol, but you get the free soda, you know, all that stuff. You start to have expectations that it's going to be there, and so you get mad when it disappears. All right, so this is a area of behavioral economics, like we've mentioned before, and kind of probably one of the most newer areas of economics on thinking about psychology of behavior. So, generators, snow shovels, water during Katrina. What's going to happen if Home Depot does the short-term profitable thing of instead of charging $1 for a water, they charge $5 for a water? Profitable to do it, right? Got to be careful. So people's element of fairness, even if the numbers that we do say that it comes out all right, really the good economic way of thinking is in your long-term rational interests. So it's really just a matter of being short-sighted, not thinking about your long-term interests. And so places are much more careful not to be too cutthroat, knowing that they want to be in business for a long time, and people do take fairness into account, which sometimes economists are guilty of discounting too quickly. That, oh, well, that doesn't matter. Who cares about that? Well, people do sometimes care about that and factor it into their decisions. Okay, any other comments or questions that raised of other examples? All right, I think that is this chapter. Oh, guess not. Oh, I did want to talk about this pricing. This is kind of an interesting one. Start naming some names. What? Okay. Don't allow him.
He was Spanish musician in Venezuela, so.
Oh, okay. Venezuelan superstar band. Okay. What's that? Alan Jackson. Shinedown, Skylar. Taylor Swift. Oh, you were bad. You didn't want to admit that one, did you? He's like holding back, like, oh, I'm not gonna put Taylor Swift. In fact, Taylor Swift was one of the people in the news, I think, on this not too long ago. So artists, what's that?
She's in Casey on Friday.
Oh, is that right? Maybe that's what I heard too. But I think there was a pricing thing too. I gotta think about that myself. What is the last concert I went to? I've been to a ton of concerts, but not a lot really in the last 4 years. Shoot. I can tell you this, it wasn't Taylor Swift. No, all right. So here's the bottom line. if you've got some good seats to the concert, do they sell at higher prices or lower prices on the secondary market now that the internet's been around? Typically higher, right? So people are buying them. There's people that are the first to dial that phone. They've got automated computer systems that quickly get the good seats because it's usually first come, first serve, on seating. Sometimes there's different tiers or whatever. But they're grabbing them up and selling them online. And so in the past, again, some of you are at ages where you might not even know this, but scalping was just illegal. You couldn't scalp tickets at all. So the internet that went by the wayside because people could just go online and get them from ticket brokers, and they kind of figured out a way to bust through the legality of it. So for practical purposes, that just went away. And so now there's been some artists, and I'm not so sure Taylor Swift wasn't involved with this somehow. And this would have been early on, a year or two ago, buying the tickets themselves and selling them on the secondary market to make their money back. Because times are tough on artists, right? When the pay per song came along and the artist could no longer bundle, you might not have thought about it this way, but that was a bundling phenomenon, right? So if you've got 15 singles on a CD, 13 of them are garbage and 2 of them are hits that you want to get, right? So what are they doing? They're bundling the product together. So it's a bundling scheme of let's put the junky stuff in with the good stuff and we sell it all as one big package, not knowing exactly how people value the music. Well, that just all got shattered to pieces with the pay per the singles. And so that world's changed, and so record sales dropped dramatically as far as sales volume of dollars being spent. And some artists took to figuring out, well, I got to turn a buck. I got to put food on the table and diapers on the kids. I'll sell some of my tickets for $1,000 on the secondary market ticket broker. So, it might not have been Taylor Swift, but I kind of think it maybe was. It came out, how the paparazzi are on like hawks on people watching that stuff, and so somehow it leaked out that she was doing that, or somebody of her stature was doing stuff like that to make an extra buck. So the bottom line is, if you engage in some of those price discrimination schemes, you better be careful. Okay. Comments, questions there?
But that was just unfair, wasn't illegal, correct?
Oh, totally, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just a matter of her looking like, they tend to want to, we're just all about the music, man. We don't want to make any money. Well, that's a load of crap, probably, for a lot of them, right? It's more than about the music, and some of them are forthright about it. No, this is a business. If you want to go back to an early example, I'm a Kiss fan, so you were kind of bashful about Taylor Swift. I'm a little bit bashful on Kiss. So Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons were the ultimate marketers of it. So back in the 1970s, this was prior to me even knowing about them, but they were kind of the devil group, right? They had the face paint, the blood, the fire, the devils, the demons, the sin, all of that stuff that parents just hate. Well, later, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, the two lead guys, wrote pretty honestly about what they were doing. It was all to turn a buck. It was all a business. There was nothing to do with the devil. With Kiss was, it would come out in the headlines that Kiss stood for Knights in Satan's Service, was the secret meaning for what Kiss means. It was all just people making up stuff, and they just kind of rode with it. And so Gene Simmons has continued to be the ultimate marketer of carrying out their image and their brand for 40 years now. So anyway, lots of things to be. This thing's on already? Good luck here. So what we've been talking about in roundabout ways are price discrimination. So this last material we're going to chunk through in chapters 12 and 13. So this will be the last week. We have 3 chapters. Honestly, the content is not anything more than the next 2 chapters. In fact, I'm not so sure that the next 2 chapters doesn't have more content than these 3 chapters. You know how these little chapters are just teeny little niblets. So this stuff all relates to each other. And so this is the most basic form of price discrimination. What does it take to be a successful price discriminator? So you need these 3 things. Differing demand elasticities. In other words, if everybody's identical, you don't need to separate out prices. It's not going to work. So you have to have people that more income than the others. So the classic example is thinking about a student and a non-student. Poor students can't afford those high prices, but non-students can afford higher prices. And so if you show your student ID, because we're able to legally separate people, right? So price discrimination is legal. Racial discrimination is not legal. Religious discrimination is not legal, right? So there's legal ways to separate groups of buyers. One of those is through a student ID. I never really thought about this until my undergraduate year in economics. I was an econ major for undergrad, and I learned that students can be discriminated against. Student status is not a protected class. So there was a sign up, at this apartment building near campus that said, "No students. We don't rent to students," or whatever. I'm like, well, wait a second, I got rights too. You can't do that. Well, it turns out they can. Yeah, it's no big deal. Students are a perfectly legal group to discriminate against. So, same thing with seniors. It doesn't seem to be a big deal to give a senior coffee to somebody who's at least 64. So there's some forms of age discrimination. It's been put into the courts on gender to some extent. So if we have ladies' night and ladies drink free, or ladies $1 Bud Lights while the guys have to pay $3, and a guy comes dressed up as a lady, as the old Aerosmith song goes, dude looks like a lady, does he get the deal or not? No, that one's been put to the test, all the way up to the Supreme Court, by the way, and the bars are still able to do some separating that way. So this last one is kind of a key one to be successful. And we'll see this theme kind of repeated through a number of different products. So the good has to be difficult or impossible to resell. Why would that need to be a condition to be a successful price discriminator? Good is difficult or to resell.
Sell a product for a certain price to somebody and then allow them to turn around and make more money off of it.
Right, and then they sell it to your high value customer, right? So you've got the person willing to pay $20, the person willing to pay $10. I separate them all out, but the good is a case of beer. And so I give students who can't afford the high prices that the non-students, the professors can afford $20, students can only afford 10, but it's a case of beer. So then the entrepreneurial student who's taken Econ 101 sits outside the liquor store, and I'm just minding my own business going into the liquor store, and I'm like, what? Hey, you going in for beer? You look like a beer drinker. And he's like, yeah, well, I was going to get a case of beer. And he said, I got a deal for you. It's $20 in there, but I'll sell it to you for $15. Well, heck, yeah, I'll do it. I'm an economist, actually. I teach econ up at the university. I'll do that deal, right? So I give the student $15. He runs into the store, buys it for 10, comes back out. We're both happy. But the business isn't too happy, right? They just sold a case of beer and lost the sale to me because there was arbitrage. So this is the fancy word of buying in one market and selling in another. So if you can quickly turn a buck without really incurring any cost, we call that arbitrage. So buying in one market and selling in another. We don't want that to happen. So where do we see price discrimination schemes? I mentioned McDonald's Senior Coffee, right? Resellable? Not too easy, right? And not in the same way that I just described the case of beer for some other product. So Old Senior.
A lot of these things, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Seems to be bringing other people with you, like kids' meals and seniors' meals, is to drag other people with you, like kids' movies. You end up bringing the higher paid people with you, so it ends up costing you more money, and it ends up upselling everything in a group.
Okay. I hear what you're saying. Now, I was thinking of something different. So first of all, if you're bringing the kids along in hopes that you're going to sell more, that's more of a bundling concept. What I was thinking you were going, and maybe you were too, is when mom and dad order the Happy Meal because son's with. So I'll take 2 Happy Meals. My other kid's out in the car, wink, wink, but I buy 2 Happy Meals because I happen to have a kid along. So I'm not sure which one you were talking about. The resell thing. But the other concept is valid too, but it's just in a different category of bundling the two together.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more from the why the business owner would come up with the concept in the first place. Maybe
Okay.
try to get some people to come in.
Yeah, no, definitely. And businesses do that, right? They kind of use the kid attraction to get the adults in to spend more money. And that's kind of back to the complementarity of the kids meal and bundling the two products together and how we set prices. We might, monster trucks comes to mind for this one. Have you guys been to the monster trucks? If you haven't, you need to. Monster trucks are awesome.
California,
You've been to that? Okay, so what are the advertisements? Have you guys seen it? Have you gone with kids before, or do you remember? If you guys don't have kids, you might not quite get this, but I've tractors battling out in a giant mud pit. Kids starting out at $8, and prices change from there. Well, you get the $8 ticket, but then they charge the adults $25. And so the kids go crazy. Dad, we gotta see the monster trucks. Gotta see the monster trucks. And that's what you're talking about, right, Jesse? Yeah. So that's used quite a bit as a pricing scheme, which is a little bit different.
baseball games or like any sport.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yep. They keep the kids' prices low and nail the adults that can afford more when they get there. All right. So those are the 3 rules for price discrimination. So the last thing I'd want to say on this is services is an easy one. So discount at the movie theater, hard to resell. Haircuts, you can't resell the haircut, right? So any service works really well in a price discrimination setup. Okay, oh that's right, this thing is dead. You are dead to me. Let's see if you charge it up a little faster. If we can't separate out the groups, we have to engage in indirect price discrimination. So this is direct price discrimination. Our other category is indirect price discrimination. Does anything come to mind that fits that category, where it's really kind of the same product, but people are paying different prices for essentially the same thing?
Honestly, like there's this name brand, generic brand, or
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. With this, I'd want a situation where 2 people are paying different prices for the name brand, or 2 people are paying different prices for the generic brand. You can't compare generic brand and name brand stuff, so that's a different animal.
So we can't have an ID. So like if you have a membership at Country Mart,
Okay.
the medicine may be cheaper.
Okay.
Is that different?
That's a little bit different too, but that's why I like to see what you guys are thinking about, because that's more of a bundling concept too, and we're going to get into another one I'll come back to you on, that kind of membership type thing. Anything else you can think
I
of?
was thinking airplane tickets.
Airplane tickets. Now, who's our travelers in the airline situation? Who's our travelers?
Like who travels a lot?
Yeah, who's our consumer basically? Who's our target? Skylar?
Yeah, business.
Business. All right, so Ryan's gone tonight. Hi, Ryan. He said he's going to maybe watch this later, but he got called away on business to Austin. So like this morning, it sounded like it was all of a sudden he had to jump a flight and said he wasn't going to be able to make it. I think he was hoping to zoom in, but his flight got delayed probably because of the weather. So he was going to be basically in transit getting down to Austin. So what was his ticket price like?
Very expensive.
Yeah.
It's the last one.
Like sometimes $800 for the person sitting there. And from KC to Austin's probably, if you buy it in advance, what, 200, 300 tops probably? It's not that far down to Austin. So he might have been paying like 800. So that is a form of indirect price discrimination. What do the airlines do to prices when we're real short to the window? They jack them up. Now, does that make sense compared to what we were thinking about before? That if you've got a couple empty seats, wouldn't your incentives be to cut the price? Right? It's just the opposite logic if you think about it. I've got empty seats, well, I'll give them away. What's the marginal cost of putting another butt in a seat? But they do it intentionally for over the long term because it's the high value customers that, hey, I've got maybe Brian's doing a deal that hinges on a $100,000 deal. Like if he's there and shakes a hand and makes the deal and gets the sale, the company gets $100,000, $800, $1,200, $1,500. Does it matter what the price of that airline ticket is? No, very inelastic demand, right? So they know that, and they also know the way business works. Do businesses have the luxury of usually planning trips like a month in advance or whatever? No, just like Ryan jumped on, man, you got to get to Austin this morning. Sorry, this came up. Susie Q left, and she got fired, and now John's stepping up, and this deal might fall apart if you don't get there right now today, right? That happens all the time. That's pretty normal in business to just have a 1 to 2 week lead. So do not book flights if you think you're going to get a deal. And early on, I kind of was naive to it too, thinking, oh, well, they should be super cheap. You know, what's the deal? And then start thinking about it a little bit more, and it makes sense. But with airlines, the research shows the optimal time to book is 21 days out. I don't know if you guys have heard that data before, but I look at this type of stuff. So 21 days out. Anybody know what day of the week you should look? Tuesday and Wednesday is kind of the optimal booking day. And if you travel, I just did Southwest did this big sale thing. You had to travel on what was it? What are we doing? Friday to Sunday or Thursday to Saturday or something. It was something weird. But after I saw the plan and thinking about the stuff we do in class, I'm like, oh, that's because business travelers would never want to pick those dates, right? Those like oddball dates. Like you have to kind of be a residential consumer to want to fill in that gap.
Is that the same with like Allegiant Air where like they only fly out like I think it's like Tuesday, Thursday, Friday on something, and then you have to fly back on like, you know, Sunday or Monday. Like
Yeah.
random days of the fly.
And I think part of their strategy is making sure planes are full, right? Picking those days, giving a real cheap price, but picking those days to be real cost efficient about it.
You can get flights for some of them for like $34.
Does Allegiant fly out of Kansas City?
Wichita.
Okay. Because Allegiant flew out of Des Moines too, but I didn't
Yeah,
think
but
they
they
flew
only fly
out
to
of.
certain areas.
They're kind of smaller. That's their niche.
One, and they only go to certain. Wichita only goes to like Vegas,
Right.
Arizona, and
Florida,
then maybe is it
Tampa, or
Florida?
something.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. That's where Des
Well,
Moines
like,
went.
and then I fly into Fresno. Fresno only goes to Honolulu and Vegas.
Okay.
It's the only ones you can fly to.
Okay. Yep. So all kinds of stuff going on like that. Whoops. All right. So direct or indirect? Tickets to a movie theater. Senior discount. Direct or indirect? direct. Grocery stores, discount coupons, in-store or weekly newspaper inserts. Indirect, right? So you see the difference there to where anybody can use the coupon, but who's going to probably really use the coupon? Most likely. High-income people or lower-income people, right? So we're kind of separating people with higher incomes, lower incomes. The opportunity cost is higher clipping coupons, but if you're lower income, then it can be a pretty great way to save money. Or if you're like me, I clip coupons too, and I'm probably not in the lower income category. But that's when these schemes start to fall apart, is when there's too many economists out there. Luckily, there's very few economists out in the world. We're a very small fraction. Otherwise, who knows?
Stereotype. If you're one of the people that's, let's say, in the higher class, why would they stereotype and think that just lower income people?
Good question. It's not really in economics a stereotype. It's the data. So the data shows lower income. What's that?
The data's never screwed.
Well, it can be, but not if it's done carefully. So you collect data on who your consumers are, what their average income is, what they buy. And so the people who are redeeming the coupons tend to fall into lower income categories. So you used the word class, I didn't. So I don't think of it as the class system. That's different, right? If you go over to India or back historically, the class system's kind of, we got the uppity ups, elites, and we've got the lower classes down here. Strictly talking income. And so sometimes low income people, i.e. college students, get degrees and eventually become high income people, right? And so they used coupons when they were going through college, but now they're not using them anymore. And sometimes high income people who were doing really well prior to the crisis became low income people. And all of a sudden they're like, wow, coupons, well, why didn't I do this before? Well, this is pretty good. Geez, you know, you could get $2 off a thing of yogurt. Well, that's a pretty good deal when it only costs $4. That's like a 50% saving, you know, cutting it in half. So there is changes. The traditional class system, once you were a servant, you were always a servant, right? If you were born into wealth, into the and so lower income people tend to change over time and become higher income people. You may not have ever thought about that because that doesn't get brought up in the news a lot. We think about the quintiles of income, the highest quintile and the lowest quintile. But what gets lost in that, if they say that the lower quintile is growing and so is the higher income, but what's happening in the middle people, or whatever they're changing around, it usually misses the boat if you look at a time frame of 30 years that people who were in the low income 30 years ago have now moved up the scale. And so it's this ever churning environment. In the United States, it tends to churn. And the turnover in the high income is actually equally surprising to the maybe even more surprising than the turnover in the low income, that people are shifting in and out of those quintiles over time. Okay, anything else? Okay, airlines, business, and economy tickets. Indirect or direct? Indirect, right? Because the business people can buy those tickets ahead of time if they don't have the emergency. All right, so any other price discrimination schemes? We kind of talked about a few. Any other ones come to mind?
Well, software.
Okay.
Student discounts that software.
Good, yeah. They give a nice faculty discount here, and I think students usually get a discount too, but I can't remember. I think I get a better deal than you guys, but I'm not positive. But I mean, it's like dirt cheap, $10 for the Microsoft Office stuff, but it's just part of our benefit package, really. I don't know what they work out exactly. But also, instructors and students generically, if you go to a regular website and you show that you're a student, actually, you don't even have to really show it, by the way. You just kind of say, I think I might. Aren't we all students? Aren't we all lifelong learners? You click the little student button, you'll get the student discount. We'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit, too. Justin?
Would it be considered a price discrimination if you're Ottawa Indian or like American Baptist member?
Yeah.
School
Yes, I mean, definitely. I was trying to think into the next step of what I was going to say. There's certain, you can't normally discriminate based on whether you're American Indian or not, but because of the heritage, there's some kind of exceptions to that. There's little exceptions to the rule all over. So if you are...
It's like applying to a scholarship that's for like minority or just for women or...
Right. And that's another area where, it's kind of a carve out. If you own or occupy your duplex and you hate Catholics, you do not have to rent to a Catholic next door. So it's legal to discriminate across the board, any type of discrimination. Nobody's protected if you own or occupy your rental property. So you don't have to rent to anybody. Now, why do you think that rule is in place? That they'd allow discrimination. Say you've got a Jewish person living in the one side, and they don't have to rent to the Catholic. What'd you say, Ryan?
Private property?
Private property, yeah. What else might go on at the private property if the Jewish person was forced to rent to the Catholic? Fights. I mean, it's like why even put people into that position? Yes, we don't agree with your bigotry, but at the same time, let's not force you to be next to each other, right? So that once in a while, laws actually make sense, but if you're a business, of course, you can't. Or if you own multiple rental properties, you literally has to be the place that you own. So there's little carve-outs like that. The Ottawa Indian example would be another one where we've got this heritage and we made a contract. I can't remember the exact date, but back to the 1800s with their kids. So, all right. So good examples. Okay, give this a read. It's a little bit longer. So what issues may IRK face if they start charging a lower price in the Philippines to generate more sales?
People could just buy it in the Philippines.
Yeah, buy it in the Philippines and resell. So we got arbitrage opportunities, right? So we've got two different markets, but people tend to be pretty entrepreneurial and pretty savvy. Once word gets out, things might not go the right way. This is an interesting rule of thumb that I didn't know. Isn't that kind of a neat stat? I don't know if you guys have heard that one before, but apparently that's a little thing with growth and kind of a first mover advantage that we'll talk about more in game theory. So get your heels dug in early. All right, so here's where they were in 97. They felt like they needed to get up to this 10% mark. So now they're facing this trade-off of should we roll the dice and possibly lose some sales? Is it worth it or is it not? They decided to reduce the prices. Now, what do cell phone companies do to kind of keep people from slopping them around? Contracts and locks, right? The SIM locks. So you can't, My wife just bought a used phone that she didn't know was AT&T. It said it was unlocked, whatever that meant. Well, turns out, they buy phones from multiple vendors like HTC, and then it can be an AT&T or T-Mobile, and even says AT&T. They try to brand the phone to them, but it's really just a programming thing. So to unlock or to lock, there's no key, there's nothing physical to it. It's just a programming. So all these phones could be multiple uses, and you could flip a chip in from AT&T or T-Mobile, but by design, they program them that way. So they did the same thing here with the Philippines. And of course, arbitrage started. 15 million phones. Not an insignificant amount. You can imagine once a few people latch onto it, just mass produce them or mass purchase them rather and resell them. So then they put in the SIM locks. The Turkish hackers broke the SIM locks. They reset the SIM locks. So they kind of battled this thing for a while. In the end, they were able to sell 50,000 more phones at that $90 price. And they were taking a guess, right? I mean, they were going off their logic. Apparently, there's studies on if they were able to penetrate the market. And sure enough, they reached 12%, ultimately rose to 34%. They raised the prices in the Philippines back to one price globally. So definitely a roll of the dice and some decisions that need to be made on the fly, and you just don't always know exactly how they're going to turn out. So this is probably one of the few antitrust laws. There might be one other one that we'll do later. But in an effort to protect small business, the Robinson-Patman Act did not allow business-to-business discounts. So mom and pop stores back post-Depression, so in 1936, the very first grocery store started, right? And prior to that, it was all mom and pop stores on little convenience stores throughout the city. And so they were able to lobby politicians to pass this act to not allow the grocery stores to get kind of volume discounts, essentially, or different types of discounts, unless they were cost justified or 40 years and have been able to more or less win and stay in business and kind of continue doing business. But they kind of toe a certain line. Walmart's famous for going into markets and beating down the suppliers, right, to get the low prices so that they can pass it on to the consumers. So one of the ways they can do that is by going overseas. So there's lots of different ways. The supply chain got much more complex today than it ever probably was dreamt it would be back in 19 forms that go on in big business. This touches on the click a button. Be careful when you're buying. Sometimes you might just self-select into the higher valued group. So imagine you're the executive assistant to the president, and the president says go on and buy a laptop. So you go to the Dell website or HP website or whatever this one was, and let's see. They got residential, they got business. Well, we're a business. Business. Oh, they got a nice selection of computers. Well, this one's got this bells and whistles. Click, click, click. Boom. Go down a different path. Well, it's for our house. Oh, this one looks good. Boy, there's a wide variety. So you don't necessarily, the two consumers don't necessarily compare going down the business side, right? How many times have you guys done that? Have you gone into that website and checked the business pricing versus the residential pricing? No, you're usually just innocent thinking? You have? Yeah, and I do too. I tend to do it, but not everybody does. A lot of people don't. Have you found that before, Ryan?
I haven't, no.
I think it's a little less than when the internet marketing first came out. They used to do more of this. Now they're able to be much more sneaky about it with the cookies that they put on, and they see what you've been buying before, and they'll just kind of put stuff out in front of you to remind you. So I think less of that goes on now, because people, once word gets out, people, oh, did you know that you can buy the residential machine and it's really the same machine? No. Other times they can restrict some of that. All right. So you're a shopper like me, Ryan. You turn over every stone when you're looking for something.
I really do. I'm a bargain shopper.
Sometimes I drive myself crazy. Yeah, I do too. Multiple sites, multiple venues, shipping costs, take every little penny into account.
What I said about being a consumer, my dad says that all the time to me, so it's a great
Well, and I'd like to think that I'm to the point of being crazy, but I'd like to consider myself rational. And sometimes I push the line, though. Like, I probably could be working on something instead of spending the 76th minute on searching the next website that might have a couple dollars. So eventually, it depends on the circumstances. If I have better things to do, I might. But I think I probably tend to overlook sometimes. But it makes me feel good. So after I recover from being fatigued by looking at the computer screen that long. Okay, so consumers do not like knowing they're paying higher prices. So that's me, that's Ryan apparently, right? That's what drives you, right? It just kind of drives you crazy if you pay a higher price. Now, not everybody's like that. I know a lot of people that are like, come on, Russ, it's $5. Who freaking cares? Why, how many of you are more like that it's not quite as big a deal? You're not as price sensitive. I appreciate that.
My brother is.
Is price sensitive or not price sensitive? Not. So it doesn't matter. Like
He likes name brands.
Yeah.
I don't know where he got it from.
Yeah.
He'll go to, for example, his girlfriend, he bought a Coach purse. Went to the Coach, an actual shop, paid $400 or something for this purse that she had to have.
Right.
And she bought him a wallet about the same price from I don't know, Coach or some other type of brand with the name brands on them.
right.
I think it was yeah, he doesn't have money. I don't know.
We can assume, economists like to assume rationality in the aggregate, that irrational behavior gets kind of outweighed by rational behavior. And so hopefully it kind of works out. But I also know plenty of people, some of which are close to me, that kind of aren't too rational about it, right? And so, yeah, sometimes it's for status, which, again, I can, from an economist standpoint, if that's important to you, even if I don't believe it's that important to a human being, but if it's important to you, then you're kind of rationally making that decision. You can tell the story when you go to your buddies. I went to the real Coach store. They had a lot of shiny stuff in there, and it was really bright and white and clean, and the people were nice, and everything was Coach, 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 and the emblems are everywhere. It was awesome, right? You got a little story to go back and tell your significant other and your significant other's friends at cocktail night, and so now you've got that story, and that's got to be worth at least $200 of the $400 bag, right? So it's a bundled product again. So we can weave different stories of rationality, but at the end of the day, are there also people that don't think about the opportunity cost? Like, what else could I be doing with this money? Had I bought the Coach bag on the internet for $150, which is actually identical to the one that's going to the store, now I could have spent that remaining $250 on a lot of nice other stuff. Maybe even more bling, and I could have been even shinier. I would have not only had a Coach bag, I would have had a nice pair of shoes to go along with my Coach bag. Now, do people think about that, or do they just kind of impulse thinking, well, that's got to do it, right? So that's where it gets tough. That's the behavioral economics, by the way. That bringing in those kind of other things that sometimes are seemingly irrational, sometimes they're just human nature, is what we've come to learn, and some of these behavior patterns that economists used to dismiss, but now think a little bit more about. What do you do when you're shown a box on a promotional code on something you're buying on a website? What do you guys do?
Go and check out what they're promoting.
Okay.
I do a Google search for to see if there's anything out there.
I don't do it every time, but if it seems significant, I'll give you an example. This last conference I just went to 2 weeks ago or whatever, to Vegas, when I registered for the conference, it was $495. And as you're going through the registration process, it said, you know, discount code if applicable or whatever, or discount amount. I can't remember how it was worded. It wasn't quite like check a code exact. Well, yeah, it was. It was a code thing. I'm like, discount code. So I did what you did, Googled the conference name, discount code or whatever. Sure enough, it brought me to some publisher's website. I can't remember what the institution was called, but I read through the little form letter and it said, hey, everybody. It was on kind of this announcement page, like on their homepage or in kind of an announcement section. Hey, by the way, this conference is in Vegas, these dates, and they're offering our group a special discount. All you have to do is plug in LMN, you know, whatever. I'm like, go. Put it in, $100 cheap. I got it for $100 less. It was $395 instead of $495, just by doing that. I'm not a member of that group. It didn't say I had to be a member of that group. It just said that was the discount code. So, you know, sometimes people aren't that careful. Again, they don't. Now, this conference probably had a larger fraction of economists, so I don't know how many dollars the conference people missed out on by not tightening things up a little bit better. But sometimes these schemes can lose some money. All right, so. Studies have shown click-through rates, they're gone, just like what you guys are doing. And once you leave, sometimes you don't come back, by the way, right? You've done that, haven't you? Where you're like, oh, I'm going to find that discount code, and then I'm going to search, and then before you know it, oh, well, I could go to this business instead of this one, right? So it's just like in car sales. As soon as you say, I'll be back, the salesman knows you're probably not going to be back, right? So it's a big deal for websites if people are leaving their sites. All right, so let's see, we're going to skip this one. So we just got a little short thing left, and we'll be calling it a night here. How many iPhone users do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4. Jesse's 5. I'm not. So out of our, what do we got here tonight? 4, 7, 8. So 5 out of 8 people are iPhone users here tonight. So does anybody remember the pricing thing? 4 gig, 8 gig, changing prices? That was a big deal. All the iPhone people. Did you guys buy at the high prices by chance? Were you one of the high price buyers? All right. So here, go ahead and read the story. So, another challenge for you. What is the marginal cost for Apple to make the machine a 16, or this is 8 versus 4, but whether it's 16 to 8 or 16 to 32, what is the marginal cost to Apple, do you figure? It can't be much, yeah. $20 tops, and probably on their mass production scale, that might even be a stretch, right? So But I agree with you. 20 at most, 10. It might be 2 for all I know, right? So there's some physical difference to the amount of storage on the chip that's placed in there, and maybe probably not any different programming really. We're just talking about the physical difference of the chip. So price difference of 100. So the point is that that price difference is completely driven by the value the customers place on it, right? Complete price discrimination scheme to get high value customers that don't care really what the price is. It's more important that they know that they have the luxury of knowing they won't run out of space or whatever, versus the 4 gig, because I think we've probably all purchased at different times in our lives devices where we didn't even come close to using all the memory in the machine, right? I know my laptop is that way. This was the one that the school gave to me. I'm not even close to the maximum capacity of the laptop. So all about pricing. All right, so alienating our previous customers isn't such a hot idea. This one really goes back to our demand curve thing, right? We're going to try to capture more of the market. So if this is our demand curve and we're at what was it, $5.99? We sold this many. We sold this many units, and now we're missing out on some because our cost is low enough that if we sold it, what would it, $3.99 the 8 gig? At $3.99, all I want to do is sell this little extra chunk here. So if this was 100 units, how can I sell 200 units? Well, I just want to change the price on the next 100, right? But what happened is they ticked off and alienated their previous people that said, I just bought this thing. I understand that things change and technology changes and prices come down over time, but 2 months? Give me a freaking break. So they ended up having to give this $200 back, totally ruining why they discounted it in the first place, right? So they tried to capture this little area of consumer surplus. That was the extra kind of wealth creation that they were, and this is the consumer surplus that these people got by purchasing a new machine at $3.99. Apple received this much in additional revenue, but now they lost this part of the revenue. Same thing we did earlier on the board. So they kind of screwed up and had to give the price break out to everybody. So again, you got to be careful. I had a similar thing happen with this software Camtasia it's for doing some of the editing on these videos, and I bought the new version. I bought version 7, paid full price. It was through the school's budget, and it was literally 35 or 45 days later. Version 8 must get add-on for only, and they were giving, how they give pay a little bit if you're an existing user or pay the new. And so I just called them up. I said, listen, I just bought this 45 days ago. Well, I'm sorry, sir. Within 30 days, you might be able to do it. And I'm like, listen, I just paid full price for this thing. I'm not paying your upcharge. I didn't have to fight too hard. I'd probably been a little more dramatic than I did. They gave it to me.
But
So
they
for quite a while. I don't know how long, but maybe it was a year, maybe it was 2 years. No, it was a while. So version 7 was out for a while. I had no clue version 8 was coming, and then all of a sudden, 45 days later, version 8, here it is, and I was still learning how to even use mine. I think I had a 30-day trial and was still trying to get it. Anyway, they didn't fight me too hard on it, but I did have to call. You do have to fight a little bit, and
But isn't that usually what companies do anyways? I wasn't working at AT&T during this time, but here I was. But the thing is, the Apple iPhone, they come out with a new one every year, and you still have those people that have to be one of the first to have the new iPhone.
yes. No, you're right. They do that all the time. I thought maybe you were going with, don't companies do that all the time where they wait for you to complain before they cave and give you the price?
Oh, no.
And that's true too, though.
Yeah.
They do. So because there's lots of people who don't like conflict. Oh, I don't want to. It's not that big a deal. It's only $40 or whatever, and they're making a rational decision. By the way, to them, they're not getting the benefit of the $45 that they're going to save or whatever. The $45 discount, it's not worth it to them, right? So businesses play that card all the time, and sometimes they put up walls or barriers to make it difficult to reach them, right? Because they know a fraction of the people, if there's 100 people that are ticked off at something, but the wait on the phone is 15 minutes, half of those people will drop after holding for 5 minutes, right? So they can purposely put up barriers sometimes. They know that they're going to get a flood of calls, but they only staff 10 people that day. Why? Because, well, we got to pay these people per hour, and people are just calling to complain anyway. Let's just have them hold for 15 minutes rather than being able to service them timely after a hold of a minute or two. Half the people will drop off, 100 people just falls to 50. Now we can handle that volume better, right? So that too is kind of, I don't know if I want to use the word sneaky, but ways that businesses can make some moves to either lower costs or raise prices depending on the circumstances.
So, for instance, I just recently, less than a month ago, bought the 5. I know.
iPhone 5?
Yeah. And I know the 5S is going to be coming out in a couple months. Would that couple months be too long for me to call and say, I want the difference in prices? Now,
I don't know. I'd try it. You've got nothing to lose. So I give this advice out to people because I'm a fighter. I'm like Ryan, kind of turning over every stone. Anytime I see something like that, I usually call and try to push the issue. I don't really shy down from conflict like that anyway. I mean, I'm a lover, not a fighter, but I'll still buttons to save that dog. That's just what victory of knowing that I won more so than the dollar value sometimes. So since I'm 40 now, I've been fighting for 20 plus years or so, and I've learned a few things, and they will, cave, like interest rates on cards. Some of the stuff you guys probably know. I got a high interest rate. Well, have you ever tried calling the company and just ask for a lower one? Well, no. They do that? Well, yeah, just call and ask. Right? Again, the company isn't going to give it to you, most companies anyway. Some of them do it once in a while for good faith, but most companies aren't going to give it to you. But if you call, that's all you need to do. You need to show that you made effort, and they're just filling you out high-value customers, low-value customers, right? It's a pricing scheme. They'll give you that price. You just have to show them who you are. And so you can be a wolf in sheep's clothing and be that low value, be that high value person, but a low value customer, and get those deals all the time. So, I don't know. Whoever you think is relevant. Yeah, if you buy the phone, it's worth a shot. It might give you something. Because sometimes I do that too. Just say, well, can't you do something for me? Well, I suppose I could give you a $10 gift certificate to Applebee's. Oh, that'll work. Right? I mean, you just take whatever they'll give you. You just have to remember these words. This I got from Dave Ramsey, and he got it from somebody else. Is that the best you can do? Is that the best you can do? It's amazing if you just say those words, is that the best you can do? And then just pause and just don't say another thing until they come out. And you'll find out. They'll either be honest and say no, but if it's a customer service representative on the other line and they have a few little bags in their, a few little tricks in their bag, well, actually, I could probably do this for you. Of course, always be pleasant on the phone and all that. All right. My former mentor, Ev Cochran Sr., said early on when I started working for him, and he said his person who watched the front desk would sometimes be nasty to people, and he'd come out and say, Liz, do you know you can attract bees more with honey than you can with vinegar? And I'm like, I looked up that quote. It's kind of an old quote, but kind of being sweet to people, you get a lot further than if you're nasty with people. And so you can attract a lot more bees with honey than you can with vinegar. All right, so there's that lesson. So what do you think about ink cartridges? Overpriced, right? Pricing scheme again, right? Hook you. Wow, you go through Best Buy or a printer's only $60,
Yeah.
and then you get cartridges with it for free. Well, that's a good deal. Of course, the ink runs dry after printing 3 pages, and you go back to the store for the refill. And how much are the ink cartridges? $15 to $20. A pack of 4 is $60. You're spending the same amount in ink cartridges as you are in the printer. So that has been a scheme that's been going on in the printer business for a while, and they've been pretty good at it. Kind of savvy. The Brother printers were kind of laser, and their ink, they had huge cartridges. So there's companies that tried to basically defeat that scheme because HP was doing so well, and they're carving a niche out. So they're out there, but you do have to be savvy about it. So yeah, they've sold it pretty well. So this gets into bundling. So strategy 1, strategy 2, $50 cartridge, $50 printer, or give the printer away for free and just charge $100 for the cartridges. So we've got low value customers, high value customers. So kind of low use in this case is the low value, like, I want a printer. But then you've got the business users, right? Kind of high volume, they're going to go through it. And so here are their the values that they place on these items, depending on the package. So then you can kind of think, who am I going to sell to? How can I maximize profits? And so by changing the pricing scheme around, give away the printer, have 1 cartridge. The low value customer is only going to use 1 cartridge. They spend $100. They're indifferent, by the way, between the two, right? Whether they do this scheme or whether they do this scheme. But we're able to induce a few extra bucks here out of the business user again on the high value, just by changing the pricing scheme. So this is known as metering schemes. So you might have seen something along these lines where you're kind of paying on volume, and they kind of get you in the end through the users. The people who use the product more ultimately end up paying more, even if on the front end you paid the same amount. Comments or questions on that?
It's like the antiviral. I think the people that create the antiviral create the viruses.
Yeah, I know. That is. I wouldn't doubt if that's happened historically. I'd like to think in the long run, between what's his name, Snowden, and WikiLeaks and other venues like that, that the word eventually gets out, so that if they are up to no good like that, cheating the system, that it'll eventually get busted, right? So in the long run, economists would predict that would get flushed out, and those people would go out of business, and only honest and virtuous people really hang in there for the long run. It's what we'd like to think, and I think for the most part that's true. Anybody see the little do-it-yourself refill your cartridge deals, right? HP might not have been thinking about that one, right? So when you come up with the pricing scheme, make sure you're thinking deep enough on your competition, kind of the Porter's 5 forces, right? All the competitive forces that are out there. Are you thinking about the threat of entry from another person coming in and undercutting? Because if you're selling the ink cartridges at a high margin, really it's just pure economic profit on those, and somebody can produce them lower, and if they're able to enter the market, and HP is of course going to do their best to make a cartridge that just fits perfectly product. it can be deemed illegal and against antitrust laws in the United States. So you cannot tie things together technically. So HP cannot perfectly tie those ink cartridges. That's why other people are able to enter the market and design them. So there can't be something to where they, but imagine it'd be pretty hard not to copy them. So they can't patent that so that there's no way the machine works with any other thing, that it can't be, some of those components can't be copied. So genuine John Deere parts, well, you can buy off-market parts too for John Deere tractors, even though for years they attempted to kind of keep that in-house, and they were pretty successful of it. But in the long run, other copycats can come out. All right, so the classic case of tying was a little system that you probably heard about. Have you guys heard of Explorer? It's made by this company called Microsoft. Maybe you've heard of them. So when Microsoft Windows, the operating system came out, guess what it came preloaded with? Explorer. And so everybody started kind of using Explorer, and so that got into an antitrust suit, and eventually Firefox and some of these other companies were successful to some degree at keeping Microsoft from just cramming Explorer down your throat. All right, this one's just an example with software. So this was an academic software. This was a statistical software that economists use. High-value customers, low-value customers. That has all the bells and whistles. And then there's the loser edition down here that has a lot of the same functionality, but not quite everything.
It's like the Office.
Office, yeah.
And some of the students and businesses like that.
Any other ones? Guys dealt with Photoshop or anything like that?
Photoshop elements instead of the big one.
Adobe.
Yeah, some of our stat keeping software is you can
Yeah.
add on and make it a little better.
So accounting
Yeah.
software, QuickBooks, it's all over the place in the software industry. What do you think the marginal cost is of having the full-blown system versus the monitored system? Zero. It's already designed. It's done, right? It's there. So again, it's a pure pricing scheme. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just calling it what it is. It's a pure pricing scheme to separate out users, the high-value users and the low-value users, the commercial users that are running businesses for the AutoCAD or the high-level Photoshop that they need to do imaging and marketing and stuff. 500 might as well be 1,000. I'm going to land a $120,000 contract if I can get the pictures looking nice in this brochure, right? So it's kind of a non-issue. Now there's still competition, so what keeps that in check, by the way, is other Photoshop type companies. So I mean, it doesn't get outrageous that they can charge $10,000 for it, but nonetheless, we can start to pick up some of those residential users. This tends to be kind of the price that makes them money, and could sell them something, give them a lesser version. So it usually is that's the way the pricing goes, is that they start off serving the big market where they think they can make money and enter the, have this figured out, and then they start picking off the residential user. Not always, but in many circumstances with the software, that's the way it goes. So there's kind of the discounting that can take place, and how that will tend to maximize profits if we have the disabled version versus the fully functional version. Again, the marginal cost of making the switch is next to nothing. So this is the last one we're going to look at. Another 30 seconds here. It's really not too much different than the software, but a little bit different. So they made the printer worse. They actually spent money to make it worse. right? So they come up with this great printer, the laser printer, that's very fast. And then they're like, you know, again, that might serve the public, but I don't want to alienate my business folks that are paying good money for the fast 10-page per minute printer. So I'm going to make the product worse. I'm going to slow it down. So they actually spent money to make it slower so that they could differentiate it in the market and pick off the households who don't care if it's 5 pages per minute or 10 pages, right? Because they're not on the time, they're not on the clock, it's not a profit-making decision. And so that's the kind of the damaged goods strategy. But in this case, there was something in there that really did make it slower. All right, we'll call it a night there.